Hey guys, how you going? My name is Madison Mueller and I'm this month's Artgecko Art Club artist. So I'm going to be running a workshop with you today on how to paint a marine animal in my watercolour style. I should probably be saying g'day from Australia because we are celebrating Artgecko launching their products over here, which is super exciting. They are going to be stocking in Jackson Drawing Supplies stores, which is my go-to art shop, so I'm really excited about that. They have really beautiful products, really good quality, but also sustainably sourced, which is something I really like to look for in my products. So very exciting stuff. A little bit about me as an artist is that I am a marine watercolor artist. I'm also a marine scientist, so that kind of goes hand in hand together. And yeah, I'm self-taught, so my style is probably a little bit different to traditional watercolor methods of the really nice washy backgrounds and all that kind of thing. I use it a little bit more structured, probably a bit more like an acrylic artist would. But yeah, I'll run through that in my tutorial and you'll see just how I use it. My style is very scientific illustration approach, trying to capture all the detail and realism in ocean animals. Today we're going to be using this awesome sketch pad. It is from Artgecko, their watercolor range. 300 GSM paper, which is really important because it's a really high quality. When you're doing layer on layer like I do, you need a really good quality paper that holds up and isn't going to ball up and flake and the fibers fall apart on you. So yeah, these guys are beautiful for that. They are also sustainably sourced, which is something I really look for. They're FSC accredited, which is Forest Stewardship Council, and their backing boards are made out of recycled materials as well. I'm also lucky enough to have been given from Artgecko this beautiful sketch pad that I had to show you. Also 300 GSM paper, really lovely quality with the binder. I'm going to be using that for my sketch pad from here on in for jotting down any ideas for new paintings I've got. So yeah, really cool. Other products that we're going to be using in this tutorial are the Winsor & Newton paints. These are my go-to paints. I have a large range of blues and greens, which goes with the ocean theme, I guess. I also do use the Art Spectrum paints as well. And I always finish my paintings off with the white gouache. Someone needs to tell me how to say that word. It's shocking that I don't know how to pronounce that properly. If you can see that. It's a bit more of an opaque than the watercolor paint, so it really helps to highlight the whites in the painting, and I will show you that in my tutorial. As far as the brushes go, I use 4 brushes. These are my go-to for like every painting that I do. Yeah, you don't need a whole heap, you don't need a whole shop worth of paint brushes to be an artist. Seriously, these guys do the job. These two are my West Art Silver Sables, a 10-0 and a 3-0. These are what I use for all my detailing. I don't know if you can see just how fine, you probably can't even see the tips, how fine those tips are. That is for all the detailing I like to do at the end of my paintings. I have this one. As you can see, it's very well used, and I've actually lost the label for it. So if anyone can recognize what that is, if you could let me know, that'd be awesome. But what we are looking for is just a really soft, fine, well not fine, a soft head on the brush there. I use that for all my water washes to have a bit more of a flow through the paint. So that's what I use for that one. And then I have my favorite, Old Faithful. It's a J. Burroughs angle, a 1/6. It's so well used that I don't know if you can see here. It's actually like about to snap in half, so I'm going to be devastated when that happens. But it's a really rough tip on the brush there. It doesn't have much flex in it at all, and I use it to kind of like almost scratch the paint onto the paper, which I will show you as well. I don't know if that's actually how the paintbrush is supposed to be, or if that's just from years of me using it very roughly. So they're the ones we're going to be using today. With that, just a pencil to draw out your drawing first, a piece of tracing paper, or if you don't have that, like me, I just use a piece of baking paper from the kitchen, and a little bit of paper towel just to use to dab up as we go. And yeah, that's about it. So today I'm going to be painting a humpback whale. I chose the humpback whale because one, they're one of my favourite animals. I've been lucky enough to be able to swim with a mum and a calf, and it was an amazing experience, but also they are just so much fun to paint. They have so much detail on them, from barnacles on their skin to scratches and scars, and yeah, they're really fun to paint. So I hope you enjoy that. And sorry, I just realised I am rubbing my belly. I'm also pregnant at the moment. But yeah, we'll get going on the tutorial. All right, let's get cracking on our painting. So first things first is choosing a reference photo for a painting. Probably a step that gets overlooked sometimes, but it's really important because obviously it determines how the whole painting is going to come out. Today we are going to be using this amazing photo from John O'Allen. When you do choose a reference photo, if you weren't lucky enough to go out and get this photo, which we all wish we were because that would be amazing, if you're going to use somebody else's photo, make sure that you ask for permission. So I've spoken to Jono and he has let me use this photo, which is very lovely. So thank you so much, Jono, for this tutorial. Always let them know exactly what you're going to be using the photo for, if you're going to be selling the original or selling prints of it, or even if you're just going to be using it for your own home. Just let them know so they know all the details before making their decision whether to grant permission. So yeah, thank you, Jono. We're going to be using that, and that's really awesome. Such a beautiful shot. If you'd like, jump onto his Instagram page and get that photo up for this tutorial, and that way you can follow along and you can zoom in and see a bit more of the detail that I'm talking about. It might help. And this is why I've chosen this shot, by the way. Look at this detail. Isn't that awesome? All of these fun little details, these little bumps, the tubercles, I think they're called, something like that. They're little hair follicles anyway, that allow the whale to actually have like a higher sense through the water. And these lines, the belly, I call them belly lines, but I think they're ventral pleats, which let the whale open their mouth extra wide for when they're feeding. But anyway, enough about the whale anatomy, but they're the cool details that I love when we're painting humpback whales, along with all these different patterns on their bodies, which are all different and unique to every whale, and barnacles and all kinds of things. So anyway, so that's why I've chosen this incredible shot. So thank you again, Jono, for that. Today, I'll just put this little reference photo in the corner here, and we can kind of use that to go along. And if you notice, the painting or the photo here is a little different to the photo. That's because I have combined the mum and the bub. And that's because when you look at the photo, you know that it's a photograph, so you don't question the angles or if it's real or not. But when you put it into context of a painting and take away the background, it all of a sudden looks like the mum's kind of cut in half. So when you're not doing a background of the painting, it's really important to think about how that would look with that taken out. So yeah, so what I've done is combine the two, which is amazing that in the one photo, the two body angles actually fit so well together. The only thing we'll have to do is change the shading here to make it look more realistic. So we're going to have to make it look like it's going further into the background by darkening some shadows. But yeah, so it's made it a little bit trickier, but that's kind of half the fun as well. So we'll get cracking on actually how I start my paintings. What I do normally is I actually draw out my animal onto a little piece of baking paper. You can use tracing paper, but I just didn't have any, so I used baking paper. That way you can kind of position it how you would like on the page and get a bit more of a visual. It definitely helps when you're working with more than one animal. You can do all the little cutouts and you can change the composition of the piece to make it more your own. So you could do something like that and mix up the original photo. It just, yeah, helps to give a bit more of a visual. We won't be doing the baby today, we're just going to do the mum, so we'll take that one away. And then yes, I would just use a pencil to trace onto the paper here, but I have one already done up, so we'll just use that for now. So here you go, that's what I would use for my outline. First layer, I use my softer brush for just the water washes, and I just wet that with water, no paint at all. And we'll be wetting the whole inside of the whale. And then this way, when we put our first water wash down, it just lets the paint flow freely across the page. So bear with me and I will just do this water wash. Okay, so that's done. Doesn't look like much, obviously, because it's just water, but that just is going to help make this paint flow. For the first layer, I always start off with this nice turquoise blue color that you see on the underbelly of marine animals. It's almost just the lighting effect of the water, where the reflection of the blue in the water kind of hits the white of the animal. For that color, I use Viridian Green, Antwerp, and a Chinese White. Pretty much always use those three. You can obviously play with other colors. They're just my go-tos, and I do sometimes mix it up, but yeah. I've now swapped over to my Old Faithful, my favorite little paintbrush there. And we'll just mix up a bit of a turquoisey blue for the underbelly. We're going to start working along the bottom ridge where that colour is most prominent on the painting. And you'll see the paint will flow freely because it's already wet there. So it's going to allow it to move across the page. It's up to you how wet you make that first layer, whether you want a really strong wash. See, I could probably have wet that paper a little bit more because it's not really flowing. So what I can do is just add a bit more water to my brush and then pull that paint down. And that's something to remember with watercolors. It's very forgiving medium. You know, technically that wasn't exactly what I was going for. I wanted to make a bit more of a wash, but you can always just add that after. So once you add more water to the page, it's going to now let that paint flow like that. Just add a little bit more water to where you want that paint to get to. And then work the paint into it. And it should start flowing a little bit better. Remember to keep an eye on where the highlights in the photo are. So these little bits here that are very white, we want to keep those white if possible. I'm just going to add a bit more water in here so that it's a bit more flowy. And we're going to run that shadow all the way up the base of the belly here and all the way into the tail. And now we want to keep this patch white, so what we do is just wet the brush and take off any excess paint. Just dab it on the paper towel if you need to. And you can almost push the paint toward the belly side so that no rough line hits up here. And then just add more water wash to pull that paint. And see how it's stayed white in there? That's exactly what we're after. Just move on to this fin here. I'm just going to add a little bit more water on top so it flows. And if you're seeing the reference shot here, the fin actually looks a little bit more green to me than the blue shadow of the belly. So we're going to play on that because that's what makes the painting interesting, is every little change in colour, which is different lighting hitting the whale. So we're going to add a little bit more green to the blue and work that into here. Remembering that there's a white ridge running all along this fin here. So we'll try and keep that white too. And you'll see I start using this brush quite roughly, almost sketching it onto the page, which I don't know what you would call that technique, or if that's just a me technique, just something that's happened over the years. All right, we haven't worked on anything up the back part here. There's actually a little blue ridge that runs all along there too, so I'm just going to add that in as well. Okay, and there you have our first layer. Doesn't look very exciting at this stage. It looks very basic, but that's okay. You'll probably like sit there for layer after layer thinking, oh, this does not look any good, until all of a sudden it all comes together. So don't worry until the end. The next thing I look at doing is then deepening this layer where the shading is. So we're looking at dark patches of this same color, which you see like in the shading of this fin here, under the chin, very dark under there, and around this fin here, which is going to start making things pop out a little bit more and look a little bit more 3D. So we just start adding on top of that layer. And I guess that's what we're kind of achieving in every single layer, is just building perspective through shading. So we bring this blue through the back of this fin here, leaving highlights there. And then I kind of blend it out just to make sure it's not too prominent, obvious lines left in it. Darkening under here, and you can even start pulling that paint along these lines. Even though it's a really early layer, you might as well just start getting into it, and the more you build on those, the more they're going to get that nice deep furrow kind of look and start looking a bit more 3D, which is exactly what we want. pull that shading all along the chin here. And this is so interesting for me, sitting here trying to think about what I actually do, because I feel like when I normally do paint, I don't have a lot going through my head. Like, I think it's more like a meditative process where I don't actually know what's coming next. I just keep painting and I don't actually think about it. So this is actually a really good little activity for me to learn what it is that I do in each layer. Because if you'd asked me this before telling you, I'd actually tell you I have no idea where I start or finish a painting. So yeah, just going to build a few more of these layers. And you can see now that there's a bit of shading happening and a little bit more depth already just in the second layer forming in this photo painting. It's going to really deepen back here. Now that's a little bit too green. That doesn't matter, we'll just cover it with a bit of blue. And it's that easy when you make a mistake to then rectify it. And in the end, it just adds more interest to the painting. You get different colors and probably makes your painting a little bit more unique than just copying directly from the photo. I mean, you'll notice I've probably worked with more of a turquoise base color than what's actually in the photo. That's probably more of a cobalt blue, but it really doesn't matter because that's what makes it unique. And then we're just going to build that nice green tone in this fin as well, because he's now looking a bit flat in comparison to the other layers we've just done. So just start building on top. You're probably going to get really sick of hearing build the layers, but yeah, that's essentially what we're going to be doing. All right. And see up here where it's kind of got a big cut-off line, we don't really want that, so we're just going to do a bit more of a wash there to pull the paint up, just so it's not so obvious. Like that. And there, essentially, is the second layer. All right, so the next step, I am going to move into looking away from the white underbelly sections and looking at the darker back of the whale and this fin. Within this dark color, we're actually going to try and look for the lightest color, if that makes sense. So like if you look under this bit here, under the mouth, there's that really nice light gray through there. And there'll also be a lighter gray all along the back of the whale. So we're just going to add that light gray in. For that, I'll be using a black, an indigo blue, black, indigo blue, and the Chinese white. You can see as well, like if you look at my palette here, see how little paint I actually have on it? That's all we need. We probably might top up through the painting, but really you don't need a lot. So yeah, keep that in mind. So we're just going to mix some of the black over here with some indigo, and we're going to pick up some of this Chinese white. Yes, it's got a bit of other blue turquoise mixed through it, but that's all right. It's not really going to matter because it's such a light layer here. It's probably just going to add a little bit of a nicer tinge to it actually, and make it quite washy and light. So you can use the white there to make sure we don't go too dark. You can always add on top of light colours, so it doesn't matter how light you go. And we're going to start from under this mouth here and bring that grey into the piece. All right, so that's pretty much the washy layers done. Now I can move on to actually getting a little bit braver with our colors, and we're going to just jump ahead to the really dark colors here. See wherever you can see the darkest color in this painting, and we're going to start building those dark colors. So we're going to go with an indigo and a black again, and we might just start on this fin down here to do that. This method that I'm showing you with this humpback whale is essentially what I use for all my marine animals. I will look at the piece and look for the lighter colors and create this washy kind of background to start with, and then build it on top of that. So, you know, if it's a shark or a fish or anything, it's going to be the same basic process. So once we've got that color in there, we can start building in. And it's kind of scary sometimes putting this layer on, because it's like, oh my gosh, a giant big black blob. But that's okay. You can always pull the paint along the piece like this, and you can always use water to make it more washy. And if it doesn't seem right, you can kind of blend it so it's not so contrasting and extreme looking. This is where as well you'll see with my paintbrush, I start doing a lot of random kind of hatching movements, like it's not going on nice and flowy anymore. That's just trying to keep or create some texture, because the skin of the whale is definitely not a nice smooth surface. So I like to try and start catching those little details in every layer. So even though we've got a lot of layers that are going to go on top of this, the more of this like hacking into it kind of technique, it's just going to make it more interesting. Let little bits of the light green show through in some areas. And yeah, it's just going to really start creating that nice textured surface for the whale. You'll see there I actually went a little bit too far over the fin, so he's going to have a little fatter, or she, sorry, it's the mum, isn't it? She's going to have a little bit of a bigger fin, but that's okay. That's just going to make it more unique. So yeah, just start building like this. And you'll see I'll go between kind of a washy effect to lay down where I'm going to paint next almost. And then when I get braver, go in with a darker colour and build on top of that. Like that. You can also actually start playing. See how here it's not really blending very nicely between the green and the grey, you can actually combine the two colours to a darker green and add that in, and that's going to help bring those two layers together, if that makes sense. And I'm just going to go ahead and start deepening these dark parts over here around the mouth, down the ridge of the mouth. Whoops, lucky that was the right spot. The eye, which I wasn't going for, but we will start there, and the back, also this back fin. So yeah, oh, I did it again. I'm not very good at pointing these things out without actually hitting the page, am I? Whoops, that's okay. Like I said, watercolor is very forgiving, so we'll work with those. And yeah, I will get on to starting to build these deep layers. You can actually, with the back of the whale here, or the top of the whale, sorry, you can start including these little tubercles, or we'll just call them little lumps and bumps, because that's easier. You can start building those in. We're going to do a lot more detail of them on the last layers, but that's okay. You can start hacking those into it, so you can start seeing how we're keeping the light through it, and you can almost start seeing a rough bumpy surface coming along there. And go under the chin. And sitting here painting this is really bringing me back to when I got to swim with a mum and calf, and it was completely by chance that they actually came past while we were in the water, and you could hear them under the water first, so we got super excited because we could hear them, and then yeah, they just appeared and were not too far away from us at all. So that was super exciting, and every time I sit here painting I just want to get back in the water, which at the moment I'm pregnant, so diving is off the cards right now, but yeah, hopefully won't be too long until I'm back with these beauties, or at least some fish and under the water would be nice. The reason I do my art, not just because I love painting, but I like to use my art for conservation where I can. So I often work with other marine organisations to help fundraise different campaigns. I do little designs for them for t-shirts and different merchandise and everything that we can help fundraise for ocean awareness. And yeah, so it's nice to have that option to be able to see some kind of positive change from my art. So yeah, I love that about it. But I might just crack on with this darker indigo shading here and stop blubbering on. So one sec, bear with me with this layer. once we have nicely kind of made a start on that darkening of that layer, now if you look at it, it looks really flat here, where it used to look like that was quite a nice shading in that lighter color. See down here, it's starting to look very flat. That's just in contrast to this nicer deepening and darkening colors. So we're going to go back to those first layers of that light blue and then work in those layers again. And I think that's something you keep in mind. It's not like you never just finish a layer. It's kind of like continually looking back at where you were and rebuilding it up to meet the rest of the painting, if that makes sense. So we're going to really build into these layers now. So that's probably a bit green. Whoops, but that's okay. We're going to want a bit more of a blue than that turquoisey green. That's better. And we're going to run that along the belly and start making this fin really pop here. And along these pleats here. And you know what, we could even go crazy and use the indigo blue mixed with the blue to make it really dark and really pop like that. Probably a little too dark. That's all right, because then we'll just use the water to wash it out and move it to where we would like the deep shading. So pull it up these pleats. That's it. So again, forever doing something I don't really mean to do, but it works out perfect. So yeah, don't stress out if you do something that wasn't really intended. Pull that all the way up the belly here, and let's really get into this deep dark chin color there, because it really needs to start popping underneath there. And pull it down into these furrows. Furrows? I don't know where I get these terms from. And again, deepening under here as well. That really needs to start becoming nice and dark. Try and make a more of a 3D look to that fin. And along this line down here. And once we're finished with this darkening of the belly colour, we're going to do an outline over the whole animal. And that's going to really start making everything come together. It's one of those layers where you start going, oh yes, this isn't looking terrible. So we'll do that in just a moment. I'm just going to add a bit through here first. Actually, before we do that layer, the outline, the layer that I really look forward to making it all come together, I might just see in the baby's tail, if you've got your photo up, or if you want to have a look here, you can see the light kind of, it's pulling down. There's like shadows that are all pulling down. That's actually creating a rounded effect on the whale, so it doesn't look so flat. We're going to actually just add that in. I'll show you what I mean by pulling down. So we just want a light grey again. So mix that white with a tiny bit of black. Make it quite washy. And we're going to start pulling it down. See, like that? Like, so it's like curving. And it's going to create that barreled belly look. And that's the kind of important things that you got to pick up on the painting, is like, if it's looking flat, where is that lighting in the reference shot that's creating a 3D look? And that's what you'll just, the more you paint, the more you'll get good at seeing those little light effects and everything that are important for creating that 3D look. So yeah, see, it's such a simple thing, but all of a sudden it's starting to look less flat because we've moved the brush in that motion, in that direction. Might not look like much, but I think that really did add a bit more of a rounded belly look. You can probably start looking up here and go, that looks a little flat as well now. Maybe if we pull that same lighter grey down into the belly, we're going to start making that nicer contrast. And deepening that layer again. Just going to put a bit more of the blue through here, pulling those colours through. Alright, and now I'll show you what I mean about the outline around the whole painting. I'm just going to swap over to my Silver Sable, the detail brush, the 3-0, and we're going to get a nice dark indigo black, little bit of white because that helps just to make it a bit more opaque. And we're going to make sure that this paint here that we're mixing, it's not too washy. We want to keep that quite thick. And we're going to run this along the whole outline of the whale. See, I'm running my brush quite like it's not a smooth line. That's going to really enhance that lumpy bumpy look that we're after. And it's actually really, see there, I don't know if you could see that or not, I left a little tiny white section, and that just looks like it's created a highlight to a bump. But yes, I'll just quickly go around the whole whale with an outline, and I'll show you what I mean about how it pulls it all together. For the outline along the bottom of the belly here, I probably wouldn't go with such a dark color at the top. I'd probably go with a really deep turquoise color there. You still want it to pop, but not to be too extreme on the outline. So yeah, I'll just quickly do that for you. All right, and yeah, I don't know if you can see how much that outline has made a difference. You'll probably definitely see it here where it's contrasted right against that white ridge there. But all over, it's made the whole whale just like pop off the paper. So I really love that layer. And see up here, you might be able to see that it's almost a little too dark in some areas. You can always blend that out as well, even though it's a tiny little line. Sometimes, yeah, I still go back into that and blend it out so it's not too obvious. Otherwise it does give that quite cartoony effect. along that one as well. And you can just start using that to deepen shadows anyway, so that's fine if it has darkened too much. Now, we're very close to be able to do our detail work, but looking at that now, I feel like we're just like one layer off from doing that. So I'm just gonna once again deepen some of the darker areas, work back through them. Now that we can see how it's all kind of coming together, you can see where it needs a little bit more work. So I'm just going to get that indigo grey blue colour and start reworking once again into darkening the layers that now seem to really need a little extra contrast. Again, I'm working with that really round, circular motion, etching kind of style with my brush. And we can start really adding to those details and really pulling down these little lines here. And see, like these lines here, they're very just boring, flat lines. But if you look at the detail in the whale, they've got a bit more to the markings, a little bit more unique. Not such a flat line, but little dot work. Start chucking that dot work through, and we can build that up on the next layer, but start bringing all those little details into it now. Start making your own little unique whale. Especially around here, you can see there's a lot of dot work along those belly lines and where the eye goes. Let's really deepen this eye socket here. And yeah, you can see how you do need a lot of patience when you're doing these kind of paintings. They do take many hours because, yeah, you're just continually adding more layers. I'm trying to do this one fairly quick as well, just to stay in the time frame so that you're not super bored watching like 10 hours of me doing the same thing. And obviously trying to speed through some of those sections where you can just see what I'm doing, but not spending too much time being too perfectionist about it. Build along this ridge here and add in those little bumps that they have along their fins to help them sense movement through the water. And it's those fun little details like that when you know what they actually are and what they do, kind of makes you want to include them even more because it's such a unique thing to that animal. Just like the scarring and everything as well. Let's pull this nice dark colour through here. And you can see it's really starting to all come together now. And don't get too hung up on like these white patches about the patterns, if it's exactly like your reference photo or not, because every whale has different patterns there. So the white patches will be different, so it's not too much of a worry where you put them. And that's where you've got to determine, is it a light effect causing that shadow, or is it a pattern on the skin of the animal? that you can, you know, change or make unique without changing the shadow and the shape of the body. Let's pull this guy really deep in here. Okay, so that's pretty much where we would like to be at with the shading before we work into the details of the piece. So I might just zoom in from here because I think it's a bit hard to see all the tiny details that we're going to add in. So bear with me. Okay, so we're a little bit more zoomed in. And we're going to be getting that tiny little fine detailed brush out again. And we're going to be working, I think we'll start with the dark details rather than the highlights. I like to leave the white highlights to the end. So again, we're going to get a black and a indigo. You can see under here. The black, indigo, bit of that nice Antwerp blue, and we're just going to make a really thick paint without making it too washy, because we're going to want to do nice obvious line work and dot work and start putting in some of those big details like the whale's eye and some of these lines on the belly. And this is what's going to really bring the painting together here. So let's start with the eye. Actually, we'll go along the mouth line first because that is a pretty prominent line there that needs to really stand out. I'm just going to really deepen that groove of the mouth by bringing a really dark colour through here, very fine line. And all the way along that mouth as well. Darken that nose tip as well. All the way along there like that. See how much that makes that stand out now? And then let's add the whale's eye. So we're going to have a little eyelid and one to go underneath. And it's funny, like you think working with a huge animal, I guess you expect to be doing like a massive big eye on it. It's actually just such a small detail. It's just a couple of lines. And there's actually another little fold just above there as well. And then bringing little eye into the middle bit there. And then shading in those grooves. like that. And let's start adding some of these bumps in to the texture of the skin. So we're going to run along this line here and really make some obvious lumps and bumps along the ridge of the fins. You can also just start adding a few little marks through the skin that are kind of like a scarring effect. Let's add that ridge down there. Now looking at this fin over here, we also have a few lumps and bumps to add in there, tubercles. And then let's work on the nose, where we'll add that same black bump along here. I'm not being too exact with exactly where they're positioned on the reference photo, but you tend to learn whereabouts they sit on each whale anyway. So they kind of sit along this ridge. Pulling into those belly lines along here. And then definitely need some up on the top of the nose as well. A few more back here. Deepen that mouth there. You see, like we've almost lost the eye detailing, but we're going to bring that back out with the white highlights at the end, so don't worry too much about that. Now let's add in around here where all the little dot work around that little grey area to make that area stand out a little bit more. You can be a little crazy and a little random with where you put it. And let's add in these nice lines here. As well. They kind of have a little darker patch, like a little spot at the top there, and then just a nice straight line, a solid line I should say. Now I'm not paying too much attention exactly where each of these lines are on the reference photo again. These lines at the back definitely need some emphasizing. And there's a couple of like a ridge kind of running along here on the tail that we might just emphasize as well with the dark detailing. Now we're just going to grab some more of the lighter blue And do a bit more detail in these lines here, but we don't want it as dark as that black or indigo blue, because it's still in that highlight lighter section on the belly, if that makes sense. So it doesn't have to be the darkest colour through there. Nice fine lines. And we've missed, sorry, I should be showing you the reference photo as well, but we've missed these lines here above the fin. They're really important lines that need to go in, otherwise it looks a bit funny. So we're going to run that one all the way across the fin there like that. And the one above it as well, there's one that comes out from underneath the eye, like that. And add a bit of that same random dot work around the edge of this white pattern. Create a bit more of a contrast between the white and the dark patches. Again, I'm being quite kind of rough with my brush, kind of scratching it onto the paper again. And you'll see how it really starts making this layer pop. You can blend it back up a little bit as well. This bit here, because I've moulded the two whales, you're kind of working without the reference photo for this patch. Just kind of winging it. Just make the top of the white patch up here. Bring that pattern down a little, why not? Like that. Scratch in, get some nice scratchy details. Let's make that skin look really nice and rough now. You can even start doing some scarring, which is where I kind of do like a, almost like a crosshatch kind of, yeah, like crosses, like that kind of thing. But then blend it out so it's not too obvious. Really start getting into that scratchy, textured skin look. A couple more bumps up here. Adding a little bit of interest where you think it might be a little bit of a boring patch. If that makes sense, like that. And if you look in the reference photo, they'll often have nice little dot work in the white parts, and that really adds some nice interest to the piece. So you don't want to lose those. We're going to add that in with the Antwerp blue and a bit of white. Just add some really obvious dots in there. It's all those little details that you really need to spot in the reference photos, and the more you do the whales, or each animal, you'll probably find they all have similar markings, and you learn what to look for, and it's all those little points that make it really interesting. Chuck some through here, definitely a nice patch in there, little hatch over here. Could probably do a bit more dot work up here, a few little scratches. make the dot work up the top there look a bit more obvious. Hack into it a little bit. Scratching around the eyes is always nice. Dot work down these lines. And I'll just keep at this for a while. As you see, I'm just doing it quite random, half following the reference photo, half just winging it. So yeah, bear with me for a second. Okay, and now that we've got that layer on, we're down to one last layer, and it's my favorite layer. We're going to be using the white gouache. I'm still rolling with gouache because I don't know how to say it, but yes, this is my favorite layer of the whole painting. I probably put way too much on there. You really don't need much at all. So that should last you a long time. But I'll just show you the reference photo and what we're looking for. So all these little white highlights, like the line there, the white along the ridge of the fin here, there's tiny little dots, scratches, barnacles, highlights of the bumps. So where there's a dark patch of a bump, you put a white patch on top. We're going to be highlighting the eye a little bit and the ridge lines. Wherever these big nice white patches in the painting are, if we've lost any of that through this detail work, we can start working back into that as well. Yeah, so that's the kind of thing we're looking for with our highlighting. Again, working with a really fine tipped brush. I'm just going to get that nice white onto it. I'm not going to say that word again, in case I'm saying it wrong. So yeah, we'll start with the white ridge line and just watch and see how much difference. Make it nice and thick. Actually, you don't have to do like a really solid line here. You can still do some random dot work to make it a little bit more interesting, textured. And you can even, if that outline is too dark, you can actually just make that a little smaller by working into it, so it doesn't look too cartoony. And can you see how much that's making it pop out? We might just stick on this fin for a little bit. And when I say little dots, sometimes I like to go through and put the tiniest of little white dots over the whole animal, any animal, underwater animal. And that kind of represents, you know, when you go for a dive or a free dive, if you're a diver, the water column's not always perfectly clear, like we would always love. There's phytoplankton, zooplankton, there's sediments, there's all kinds of things in the water column that kind of stop that 100% clarity. And I like to include that in the piece. So if you go through and add these tiny little dots, that's kind of like what I imagine I'm seeing when I'm underwater. I think that's a really cool detail to add. I don't even know if people would ever notice these little dots in their paintings, but to me, I really enjoy including them. And you can see it starts adding a nice little interesting feature regardless if you'd notice it normally or not. Yeah, so just a few of those randomly over it. And then I also like to keep going with that cross-hatching scar work that we were doing with the darker colour. We also add that with the highlights and a few little random markings here and there, and that kind of adds that scarring effect, giving each animal its own little story, because I'm sure they've all gone through some pretty crazy encounters and they often have quite extreme scarring, which, you know, it's nice to think that it's always a natural thing, from sharks and predators and things like that, but sometimes it's also unfortunately boat props that also scar these animals, and whales have a big issue with this, with the huge ships that are out there, and they often unfortunately do get hit. So yeah, you can see some pretty crazy scarring going on. I like to keep that kind of detail in the picture as well. So here was where I was saying there was a nice white patch that, you know, we tried to keep there throughout the piece, but sometimes it does get lost. I do sometimes work back into that to make it stand back out like that, just really bringing that white layer back into it. It's almost as if you want the white layer to be the final layer on top. I think that is not what traditional watercolor artists do. I think technically they try and avoid adding any white at the end. You're supposed to be using that negative space of the white, and you're supposed to have left that throughout. When I say supposed to, you can do what you want, but like traditional method wise. But yeah, this is the way I do it. So I don't know if it's cheating or not. Just adding a bit of highlights. Even add a little bit of highlights to those little dark dots and make them really stand out. You can put a couple more little dots and markings along this ridge, really make it look rough. A bit more white in there. We'll move down onto this fin here, where we need to add a little bit of highlight where the dark dots are. You're almost going back over top of wherever you've added dark features to make that pop. Add a little bit of highlight and then go crazy and add a few little marks here and there. See these lines that we added just above the fin here? They could do with some highlighting so that they stand out a little bit. So yeah, we're just looking for things like that. Any details that you've added in but aren't really popping. These lines all need a nice highlight underneath the dark line. That's going to make them stand out. See this one here, it's almost lost. You can't actually see. Once you put that line underneath it, it's going to bring it back. Same with all of these actually. A tiny little bit of white. And again, have a look where those nice white chunks are and do a little bit of a wash. Bring the white back into the painting that we've lost. A nice bit of white in here. We're just going to do that quite rough. And definitely this white section behind the eye. Keep that nice and white. Yeah, it's just training your eye to be able to pick where each layer is in the photos and where you need to emphasize certain traits. And the more you paint, the more you'll get used to looking for these things, and it'll just come naturally, and you won't even think about it when you're doing. See there, I kind of stuffed up a little bit there. It looks a bit funky. I think maybe just because that's needs to be joined. And yeah, you can always rework over top of things. Like that. Looks a bit better. Pull this line here. We want to keep that one nice and obvious. And then having a look at the mouth, where do we need to emphasize the highlights? There's definitely that nice little ridge there. Under the dark mouth line. And while we're up here, we'll just do a few little highlights on all of the bumps that we've added in. So wherever the bump is, add a highlight. I think it's above. Where am I putting it? I'm adding as if the light is coming from this direction, so it's hitting the front and top of each bump, if that makes sense. So that's the other thing that's a handy little tool to use, is just imagine where the light's coming and where would that be hitting. So if there's a bump there, it would hit the top and the front. Something like that. Again, we've lost quite a lot of the light through here, so we'll just add a little lighter colour. And another little fun feature is those little barnacle encrustings. They're kind of like a little open circle like that. You can add a few of those around as well. Sometimes they come in little clusters. So add a few to make a little cluster. And you'll see that's really starting to give some pretty cool features at the front of this whale. You can add these through the fins as well. Along that ridge line they often form. Make a few little clusters. You can add a little random one here and there. They often do have a few. Mainly, yeah, I guess it's mainly at the nose and the fins. Do little half marks. Little dots in here. A few more little highlights up here. Highlight on the ridge of each of these bumps. And then emphasize these little highlights around here, around the tail. A few little barnacles, dots. And now we just need to make that eye emphasized. Yes, pop out. So running a highlight under the eyelid, a dot in the eye, and just a tiny bit of white underneath there as well. And then bring that white pattern into the eye a bit. And you can see how it's such a simple, it's only a couple of lines there, and that's what's making the eye and giving this whale a bit of like life. That tiny little white dot in the eye of every animal, of the pupil, is what just brings the whole painting to life and really gives the animal character. Yeah, we're just going to add some cross hatching, some bit of scarring through here. You can see in the painting, the reference photo, that there actually is a fair bit of scarring through here. And yeah, I guess this is where we're almost finished. It's hard to know when you're finished sometimes, and you can just keep on keeping on, but you don't want to overdo it either. So we're pretty much there, really. We've almost finished our big, beautiful humpy. So yeah, there you have it. That, when I can stop myself doing it, I'll stop soon. let's just have a look through here. Okay, all right, I'm doing it, I'm calling it. Tiny bit more. Okay, I'm gonna do it, I'm stopping. We're done. That there is a humpback whale, and I've just got all these marks here. Oh no, I haven't, sorry. That's better. Actually, what I will show you before we finish, because that's perfect, when you do make a little stuff up like that, I wet my brush, make sure the water's really clean, make sure your brush is really clean. Not like my brush, which is really filthy dirty. Hang on one second. So you can just test it out on a piece of watercolour, piece of, I always say, I can never think of this word, paper towel. Paper towel. Wipe your brush until it's nice and clean, until that comes through with no paint on it. Which we're getting there. Keep just dabbing it in water, dab off the paint. Okay, so that's almost clean. There, kind of. Grab a tiny little bit of paper towel and ball it up. Wet your brush again. Now, I'm seeing this little dot here that I've added to the page. Just rub it really gently. See, that's probably not the cleanest brush. I'm just rushing it a bit. And then dab it out. And you can almost erase it. If I'd done that with a perfectly clean brush, you'd be more likely to get rid of it whole. Something like that. And you can do that if you do anything in your painting that you really don't like as well. Just add a little bit of wet water so it lifts the paint off the page. And then use the paper towel to dab it up to take that paint completely off. There you go. So yeah, there she is. There's our beautiful humpy. Thanks so much, guys. I hope you enjoyed the tutorial. I had a lot of fun doing it. So yeah, thank you very much. Cheers.